So some of the questions I got ahead of time, I'm going to group into one here because I think it's easier to answer them all at the same time. So Cody Lee asked, he said, moose ribs. Moose ribs are challenging, which I can imagine. I have not cooked moose ribs, but I just kind of picture them being these big yabba-doo style Flintstones ribs that you need to cook in a hot tub. Penny Ann asked, said, Jason, how do I cook this? And she had a picture of beef back rib fingers, which I have never heard of beef back rib fingers before. She said, I want to sous vide them today. Any clue? And it comes down to, I'd say 80% of the posts in this Facebook group come down to either someone just cooks steak or someone wants to know the time and temperature to cook something. And there's a few people that generally chime in. Either people have cooked stuff before, or there's some people like me that can figure out, at least in a little within a good error margin of how long to cook other things. And for me, it comes down to once you start understanding how long stuff needs to cook, you have a better feel for how things get lumped together. I talk about this a little bit in my article about how to cook red meat, but most red meat and pork tends to behave the same. Some might be tougher and some might be more tender, but in general, like moose shoulder is going to behave similar to bear shoulder, to cow shoulder, to pork shoulder. They're tougher cuts of meat. They got a lot of work and they're going to need to be broken down longer over longer periods of time. And I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but in general, you can look at reputable time and temperature charts for like beef and then apply it to other things. We have a bunch of cuts that thousands of people have used that have bought the books and in the group, and I can't guarantee that every single one is 100% correct, but we've fixed them over the last decade as issues have come up, and it's something that I've found really happy with the time and temperatures there. Serious Eats also generally has good stuff. The Innova app, I think, does. I assume theirs is pretty good. I know some people like it, and I know Cole knows how to cook really well, so I assume he makes sure that they're looking good. But find someone like that you like their time and temperatures, and then you can rely on those. So that's what I do. The beef back rib fingers, I did a Google search, not for sous vide, but just to see how are these normally cooked. And they're normally braised, and they come from the beef ribs. So my recommendation was to look at beef rib temperatures, which I look at the ones from my guides, and start there. And it should probably turn out pretty well. For something like moose ribs, you're going to want to look at how long do ribs normally take. And beef ribs and pork ribs generally take around the same amount of time. So the first question that I ask when it's something weird like moose or bear or any of these other animals that I don't cook very often is their meat generally tougher or more tender than beef? And you can do that with a simple Google search without needing to look for sous vide specifics. But is moose normally considered something that is tougher and more braised or more longer cooking times? And if so, then maybe bump up the beef times by 20 or 30 or 40% to get you to an area that might be more in line with that. So that's how I always figure out where I would start for some of these more unusual cuts. I know Justice Stewart is on some. I'm not sure if he's on today, but he does a whole lot of exotic cooking, so I'm sure he can answer some of these questions. So I think his response to that was, here's a link to cooking camel ribs. But that's how I always approach it, and I've generally been pretty happy with it. I wouldn't buy an exotic piece of meat and cook it for a party that I was really trying to impress everyone my very first time. I would cook it ahead of time and pull it out along the way to see when it actually got tender enough of what I was looking for. And the good thing with sous vide is you could do that 2 days in advance and then keep in your fridge, reheat it really quick when people come over, and then you'd already know they was cooked perfectly. So that's what I do for exotic meat, but also for any cut of beef or pork. I look at my own. People ask me, I just look it up in my book or on my website where I have the answers, and then I play Google and give them the answer that's on my website because they didn't want to look it up. But that's where I always go for. And the other thing about I wanted to mention about this is that it's not just for exotic meat that moose is going to be tougher than beef. Beef has so much variety in it. Someone will say like, "How long do I cook a chuck roast for?" And someone will answer back with, 131 for 24 hours. And someone says, "Well, I did that and it was so tough, I had to do 48 hours." And then someone chimes in, "Well, I did 12 hours and it was mushy after 12 hours." And that's because no one's giving enough information to make an accurate judgment. If you have a select piece of chuck roast that came from a factory raised cow, and that was raised on the feedlot, it's going to have a very different texture, very different tenderness and toughness than if you have like a wagyu chuck roast from a high end Japanese cow, or a prime cow, or a grass fed cow, or someone that was raised on a farm and so it was getting exercise. All these animals will have very different characteristics and will need to be cooked at different times. And so that's why people start to run into these issues that I recommend going to your butcher, even if that's at your grocery store, and find out what type of meat that they generally sell and what you get from there. And then you can start to really hone in what works for you and the type of meat that you're getting in your own area. But we forget that all meat is not created equal and they behave really differently during cook times. And that's true of whether it's sous vide or grilling or pan frying or however you're cooking your food.